Hi there, my name is Oliver. Tonight I will be reading chapters 3 and 4 from The Sword and the Chain, the second novel in the trilogy, Guardians of the Flame, The Warriors. In these chapters, we rejoin our party as they prepare to set out for the city of Metreyll to gather supplies and information. Let's get started. Chapter 3 Metreyll. I was never attached to that great sect, whose doctrine is that each one should select, out of the crowd, a mistress or a friend, and all the rest, though fair and wise, commend, to cold oblivion, though 'tis in the code, of modern morals and the beaten road, which those poor slaves with weary footsteps tread, who travel to their home among the dead, by the broad highway of the world, and so, with one chained friend, perhaps a jealous foe, the dreariest and the longest journey go. Percy Bysshe Shelley. The preserve was miles behind. Half a mile below, the waste of El Rood lay in the starlight, a solid expanse of baked, cracked earth, the blankness relieved only by an occasional stone outcropping. Shivering only partly from the cold, Karl clung to Elegon's back. The cool night air whistled by, whipping through his hair. He looked down and shuddered. Even if the waste had not held bad memories, it would still have been unpleasant. A landscape like something out of the pictures the Apollo astronauts had brought back, with none of the charm of accomplishment those pictures carried with them. Behind him, Walter Slavatsky chuckled. "I wouldn't worry about it, Karl," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the rush of wind. "It's an advantage. As long as we're at the preserve, anyone who wants to give us trouble would have to cross 40 miles of the waste to do it."
He has a point, Karl, and, powerful as they are, I'm willing to bet that the Hand clerics are grateful for that protection.
That was probably true, and it pointed up one of the troubles in this world. Anytime you had anything, be it a piece of land, a horse, a sword, even your own life, you always had to consider the possibility that someone would try to take it away from you, just because he wanted it.
And is that so different from your own world?
For a moment, Karl's head felt as though it were being stroked by gentle fingers, from inside. Then,
Or don't you consciously recall the Sudetenland, Lithuania, Wounded Knee, or...
Enough. You made your point. Just leave it at that, huh? But, damn it, there was a difference. Back home, there was at least an acknowledgement that the strong preying on the weak was wrong. It was reflected in laws, customs, and folk tales, from fables about Robin Hood to the legends of Wyatt Earp. He chuckled. Well, it was the legend that counted, anyway. Back when he was majoring in American history, Karl had found several accounts that suggested that the Earp brothers were just another gang of hoods, as bad as the Clantons they had gunned down, from ambush, at the OK Corral. The Earps had managed to wangle themselves badges, that was all. And when you think about it, quite probably Robin Hood robbed the rich to give to himself. Which made sense. In the hold-up business, robbing the poor had to be easier than robbing the rich, but it was bound to be financially unrewarding.
That's why they call them the poor, Karl. If it was rewarding to rob them, they probably would be known as the rich.
Funny.
Only to those with a sense of humor.
The boundary of the waste loomed ahead, a knife-sharp break between the scarred ground and the forested land beyond. In the starlight, the huge oaks would normally have seemed to be threatening hulks, but by comparison with the waste, their dark masses were somehow comforting. "You don't have to go any further. Set us down anywhere near here."
Just a short way.
Elegon's flight slowed.
Let me put you a bit closer. This way you won't have so far to walk.
Why the sudden concern for my sore feet?
I have my reasons,
the dragon responded, with a bit of a mental sniff.
But since you're so eager to be on foot...
The dragon circled a clearing among the tall trees, then braked to a safe, if bumpy, landing. Karl vaulted from Elegon's back, landing lightly on the rocky ground. Reflexively, He slipped his right hand to his sword hilt as he peered into the night. Nothing. Just trees in the dark, and a mostly overgrown path leading, he hoped, toward Metreyll. Walter climbed down to stand beside him. "My guess is that we're about 5 miles out," he said, helping Karl to slip his arms into the straps of a rucksack. "We could camp here, and walk into town in the morning, I guess," Walter said, frowning. He brightened. "Or maybe we should just walk in now." Karl slipped his thumbs under the rucksack straps. "Do I get 2 guesses which you'd rather do?" "Be safe. Take 3. "Well?" Slovatsky jerked a thumb toward a path. "Why not?" "Elegon, you'd better get going. But do me a favor. Circle overhead and see if the path leads to the Metreyll Road."
"I didn't set you down here by accident, fool. Of course it does."
As Karl and Walter moved away, the dragon's wings began moving, beating until they were only a blur in the darkness, sending dust and leaves swirling into the air. Elegon sprang skyward and slipped away into the night, his outline momentarily visible against the glimmer of the overhead stars.
"Be careful,"
he said, his mental voice barely audible. And then he was gone. "Let's walk," Karl said. They walked in silence for a few minutes, carefully picking their way along the dirt path through the trees. Finally, Walter spoke. "I've got a suggestion, if you don't mind."
"Yes?"
"Look, this is just a supply trip." Slovatsky patted at the leather pouch dangling from his belt. "Right?"
"You have a keen eye for the obvious."
Karl shrugged.
"What's your point?"
Let me put it this way. I'm not going to take the chance of lifting anything. Granted, as long as we're based in the sanctuary, we've got a nice buffer zone between Metreyll and us, but there's no need to push it. We don't want to get the locals angry at us. Too risky."
"Fine, so you're not going to use your skills."
That made sense. There was enough to do in Metreyll, and with all the coin they had, money wouldn't be a problem for a long while. They had to buy provisions and supplies, as well as some hardware, and weapons. The party was short of spares. "That wasn't what I meant." Walter ducked under an overhanging branch, then made a show of holding it out of the way so that Karl could pass. Sometimes it seemed as though Walter made too much of Karl being larger than he was. Then again, maybe that was understandable. Slovatsky had long been accustomed to being the biggest man in almost any group. "What I meant," Slovatsky went on, "is that you have to watch it. There's liable to be some sort of slave market in Metreyll. Not as big as the one in Pandathaway, granted, but something. The whole economy of this region is based on slavery."
"So?"
"So we give Metreyll a buy. No interfering with local customs, no matter how repugnant. At least for the time being. My guess is there's still a reward out for you in Pandathaway. We don't want reports getting back there about your still being alive."
"Thank you for your tender concern about my health."
Slovatsky snorted. "And I thank you for the sarcasm. I don't particularly care if you believe it, but I am worried about you. As well as me. If you start swinging that sword in Metreyll, we're both in deep trouble."
"Walter, where'd you get the idea that I'm some sort of bloodthirsty monster?"
Yesterday was kind of a clue." He held up a hand to forestall Karl's objection. "Okay, that was a cheap shot. Look, I'm not saying you really enjoy slicing open someone's gut. With the exception of the time we killed Ullman and his men, I don't think you've ever liked violence. But it doesn't bother you the way it used to. What it comes down to, Karl, is something you said in Pandathaway, after you freed Elegon. Something about, if what you're doing is important enough, you worry about the consequences later."
"Wait."
"No, you wait. Slovatsky's law number 17. Thou shalt always consider the consequences of thy actions. You could make a lot of trouble for all of us if you don't keep your head on." He understood Walter's point, and it did make a kind of sense. The time he had freed Elegon had cost them all much. But to commit himself not to do anything about people in chains... Karl shrugged.
"I gave Ahira my word. Just leave it at that."
Walter sighed deeply. "Unless I can convince you that I'm right, I wouldn't trust your reflexes, Karl. I've seen the way you clap your hand to your sword whenever you're irritated about anything. When you know there's no reason to cut someone up, you're safe to be around, granted. I'm not worried about you stabbing me if I don't put enough sugar in your coffee. The trouble is, you're thinking as if you were the only one who can suffer from your actions, damn it.
You sound scared.
I am, Walter snorted. Not just for my own tender hide. I didn't want to tell you this, but Elegon told me something on our way over. He tuned you out. Wasn't sure whether you should know or not. He left it up to me whether and when to clue you in.
And what's this great secret?
Well, you know his nose is more sensitive than ours. Walter shook his head slowly. It must have made it hell for him in the sewers. But the point is, he can pick up on things that you and I can't. Even things that a medical lab back home would have trouble with. Slight biochemical changes, for instance. Hormones, stuff like that. A cold chill washed across Karl's back.
Whose biochemical changes?
Andrea's. Nobody knows about it but you, me, and Elegon. Karl, she's pregnant. Although only a couple of days' worth. I guess congratulations are in order, no?
Oh, God. You're lying.
He turned to face Slovatsky.
Aren't you?
Nope. Now, did that drive the point home? If you screw up, you're not just endangering you and me, and Andy for that matter. You get yourself killed or put the rest of us on another wanted list, and you're putting an unborn child's life in danger. Yours. Slovatsky snorted. So are you still interested in playing Lone Ranger right away? If you call me Tonto, I swear I'll stick a knife in you. His head spun. A baby?
Karl, you... Okay. You made your point.
I'm going to be a father. He rubbed his knuckles against the side of his head. There's going to be a baby depending on me.
Hope so, Slovatsky said solemnly.
Brightening, he clapped a hand to Karl's shoulder.
Hey, can I be the godfather?
Shut up. Slovatsky chuckled.
You want what?
The blacksmith turned from his forge, bringing the redly glowing piece of metal over to his anvil, holding it easily with the long wrought iron pincers. He picked up his hammer and gave the hot metal a few tentative blows before settling down to pounding it in earnest. Wary of flying sparks, Karl moved a few feet back.
I want a length of chain, he said in Arendra, about this long.
He held his hands about 3 feet apart.
With an iron weight on either end. Those should be cylindrical, about half the size of my fist. If you can do that sort of thing.
It wouldn't be difficult, the smith said, returning his worked iron to the forge. I can have that for you by noon, if you're in a hurry. Sweat running in rivulets down his face and into his sparse red beard, he pumped the bellows for a few moments before pausing to take a dipperful of water from an oaken barrel. The smith drank deeply, clearly relishing every swallow. He took a second dipperful, tilted his head back, and slowly poured the water onto his upturned face, then shook his head to clear the water from his eyes. What do you want it for? He asked, offering Karl a dipperful of water with a gesture of his hand and a raised eyebrow.
Religious artifact.
Karl accepted the dipper and drank.
I'm an apostle of the metal god.
The smith cocked his head. There isn't a metal god.
Then I'm probably not one of his apostles.
The smith threw back his head and laughed. And Tyrannus is liable to get his proud nose cut off if he puts it where it doesn't belong, eh? Very well, have it your way. Now, as to the price.
We're not done yet. I want 2 of them, and I'll also want to buy some of your other equipment. I'll need a general-purpose anvil, some basic tools, hammer, tongs, and 100 weight of rod, sheet, and bar stock. A bit of...
The smith snorted. Granted, there's enough work for another smith in Metreyll, but you don't look the type. He set his hammer down and reached out, taking Karl's right hand in both of his. From this ridge of callus, I'd say you've spent much time with that sword in your hand, but none with a hammer. And you're too old to apprentice. Karl drew his hand back.
It's for a friend. Now what sort of coin are we talking about for all this?
It was hard to concentrate on the transaction with the back of his mind shouting. A father. I'm going to be a father. Tyrannus shook his head. You don't know what you're talking about. He gestured at the 7 different anvils scattered around the shop, each mounted on its own tree trunk stand. They ranged dramatically in size and shape, from a tiny one that couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds, to an immense, almost cubical monster of an anvil that Karl probably couldn't have lifted. Even a brainless farrier needs at least 2 anvils to do any kind of work at all. If your friend wants to be able to do more than shoe horses, he'll need at least 3, and I'll need quite a bit of coin for each. Damn, but it's a pain to cast a new anvil. You're planning to travel with them? He peered at Karl from under heavy brows. I'd be a fool to help you set up a friend of yours in competition with me, no matter what the price. Karl shook his head. That's not what I'm planning to do. I swear it. The smith nodded. On your sword, if you please. Karl slowly drew his sword, then balanced the flat of his blade on his outstretched palms. What I have sworn is true. The smith shrugged. I guess that settles it. Nice piece of workmanship, that sword. Are those Cyforth markings? I don't know. Would you like to see it? Of course. Tyrnus accepted the hilt in his huge hands. He held the sword carefully, stroking a rough thumbnail along the edge. Very sharp. Holds the edge well, I'll wager. He flicked the blade with his finger, smiling at the clear ting. No, he answered his own question. That's not a Cyforth blade. They make good steel in Cyforth, but not this fine. Could be Endel, I suppose. Those dwarves know their alloys. He rummaged around in a wooden bin until he found a soft wool cloth, then handed the sword and cloth to Karl. Where did you get it? Karl shrugged as he used the cloth to wipe the blade. He replaced his sword in its scabbard. He couldn't answer honestly. The smith wouldn't believe him. Or, possibly worse, he might. Back home, on the other side, the sword had been a skinning knife. It had translated well. I just found it somewhere. Better an evasion than to be caught in a lie. Now, when can you have the anvils and such ready? You're planning to be in Metreyll long? Not past sunset. I'm en route to... Visualizing Ahira's map of the Aran regions, he picked a city at random. Eric. I plan to be out of Metreyll by nightfall. Can't be done. The smith shook his head. I do have work to do. I could spare some rodstock, I suppose. But I don't have any spare hammers, and casting anvils is just too much trouble to bother with. Karl produced a pair of platinum coins, holding one between thumb and forefinger. The obverse showed a bust of a bearded man, the reverse a stylistic rippling of waves. Are you sure? Pandathaway coin, eh? The smith spread his palms. Well, those 2 are fine as a down payment, but I'll need 6 more on the delivery. This is platinum, after all, and Pandathaway coin at that. I thought you'd be happy to take these 2 and give me some gold back, as well as the iron. I doubt that. The smith grinned. I wouldn't call that thinking at all. Let's agree on 7 platinum, and we'll both be happy. The money wasn't really a problem, but there was no need for Karl to draw attention to himself by seeming to have too free a purse. 3. And you will give me 5 gold back. Pandathaway coin, not this debased Metreyll coinage. 6 platinum and 6 gold, and you will stay in Metreyll, along with your strong back, long enough to help me cast 3 new anvils. Karl sighed and resigned himself to a long bargaining session. 4. 5 pieces of platinum, 6 of gold, 4 of silver, and a bent copper pourer, Karl waited for Walter Slavatsky in the town square, near the Lord's palace. Metreyll was laid out differently than the other cities they had seen. Unlike Glendale, the city itself had no protecting walls. Unlike Pandathaway, it was both landlocked and apparently unplanned. Metreyll's streets radiated out from the central palace like a misshapen web woven by a demented spider. Although calling it a palace might have been too generous an assessment. It was a cluster of 9 two-storied sandstone buildings, surrounded by narrow, crumbling ramparts. The raised portcullis showed its age. The timbers were splintering, the pulley chains and spikes so rusty that it was clear the portcullis was lowered rarely, if ever. 2 mail-clad guardsmen at the gate eyed him casually as they sat on 3-legged stools, their spears propped up against the wall nearby, but well out of reach. Karl nodded to himself. Ill-kept, unattended defenses were a clear sign that Metreyll hadn't known warfare for a while, and the lack of challenge from the bored guardsmen meant that the locals were used to the presence of strangers. "Are you going to sleep just standing there?" Squinting in the bright sunlight, Walter smiled down at him from the bench of the half-filled flatbed wagon. "You'll be glad to hear that beef is cheap. Seems the ranchers had too good a year. I picked up about 400 pounds of jerky for a song." He snorted. "Not exactly this way to Cheap Street, but a song." He set the brake and dismounted, patting the 2 hitched mules in passing. "Although horseflesh, even mule flesh, is at a premium. I bought a stallion and another gelding. The hostler will hang on to them until dark, but they set me back a nice piece of change. Apparently it's going to be another bumper crop of cattle this year, and the tributary ranchers are paying nice prices for labor. All kinds of labor." Karl smiled as he took off his rucksack and tossed it into the wagon. "I almost wish we needed a bit of money. When I was a kid, I fully intended to be a cowboy." He shrugged. "Maybe we could look into all of us hiring out his hands anyway, just for a while." Of course, they would have to figure out how to keep Elegon out of sight. No, that probably wouldn't do. He had responsibilities now. Fulfilling childhood fantasies was something he would have to set aside. Walter shook his head. "I don't think that's such a good idea. All the hiring is for a cattle drive. And guess where that's headed?" "Pandathaway?" Slovatsky nodded. "Everything comes to Pandathaway. Except us, I hope. I doubt they go easy on felons' accomplices." "Good point. So you keep your eyes open, too." "They never close, Karl. Now, how'd you do at the Smiths?" "Fine, I guess. Although he struck a hard deal. Come to think of it, I probably was taken. But he did throw in a couple of used swords." He shrugged. "In any case, we can pick up that gear at sunset, too. West end of town." He eyed the noon sun. "Any ideas on what we should do until then?" Slovatsky raised an eyebrow. "Joy Street? Or whatever they call it. It's down this way." He held up a palm. "You don't absolutely have to cheat on Andy, you know. Just a few beers, while I see what's available. Prisoner of my hormones, I am." Karl laughed. "Why not? I could use a beer." He boosted himself to the bed of the wagon and sprawled on a sack of grain. "You drive." The unpaved street twisted gently through the markets. Past a drab tarpaulin where a sweaty grain seller hawked his muslin sacks of oats and barley, a ramshackle corral where a well-fleshed hostler groomed his tattered assortment of swayback mares and half-lame geldings, an open-air workbench where a squinting leatherworker and a bewhiskered swordsman haggled angrily over the price of a fore-and-aft peaked saddle. Wagons creaked through the street as farmers and their slaves brought sacked grain and caged chickens to market. Some wagons were drawn by dusty mules, or slowly plodding oxen. Others were handcarts, pulled by slaves. Karl gripped his sword. He fondled the sharkskin hilt for a moment, then sighed and let his hand drop. Damn Walter for being right. This wasn't the time or place to get involved in a sword fight. And besides, I can't solve the problem by chopping up everyone who owns a slave. That just wouldn't do it. That thought didn't make him feel any better. "God damn it." "Just keep cool," Slovatsky whispered, urging the mules on. The street widened as the slave market came into view. Surrounded by 100 bidders and spectators, a noisy auction proceeded in front of a box-like wagon, bearing the wave and chain insignia of the Pandathaway Slavers Guild. The auctioneer accepted a handful of coins from a farmer, then, smilingly, snapped the farmer's chains around the wrists of a skinny, bearded slave before removing his own chains. "You should have no difficulty with this one. He's been well tamed," the auctioneer said, as the farmer looped a hemp rope around the slave's neck. As the slave was led away, Karl shuddered at the old scars that crisscrossed his back. Well tamed. "Easy, Karl," Walter whispered. "There's nothing you can do about it." One of the slavers brought the next slave out of the wagon. This slave was a short, dark man in a filthy cotton loincloth. His whip scars were fresh. Livid red wheels were spattered randomly over his hairy torso and legs. Lines around the edge of his mouth and eyes suggested that he used to smile often, but he wasn't smiling now. Chained at his neck, wrists, and ankles, he stared sullenly out at the crowd. A cold chill ran up Karl's spine.
Walter, I know him.
No kidding?
Slovatsky's expression belied his calm tone. He looked as if he had been slapped. The game's in Padathaway. He was my first opponent. Took him out in a few seconds. This was horrible. An expectant father had no business risking his own life, forgetting the danger to the others. But this man was somebody Karl knew. Not a close friend, granted. He didn't even know the other's name. But someone he knew nonetheless. He turned to Slovatsky. The thief shook his head.
Karl, do us both a favor and get that expression the hell off your face. You're starting to draw stares.
He lowered his voice.
That's better. We're just a couple of travelers, chatting idly about the weather and the price of flesh, got it? I don't know exactly what harebrained scheme you're working on, but we're not going to do it. No way. Remember, you gave a hero your word.
Walter.
Slovatsky raised his palm. But this isn't the time to put your honor to the test. We've got plenty of coin. We'll bid on him. Sit tight for a moment. Tossing the reins to Karl, he vaulted from the wagon and moved into the crowd. The bidding was stiff. Several of the local farmers and ranchers forced the price from the initial 12 gold up to more than 2 platinum. The most persistent, a stocky man in a sweat-stained cotton tunic, followed each of his bids with a glare at Slovatsky, as though challenging him to go on. When the bidding topped 2 platinum, the stocky man threw up his hands and stalked off, muttering vague curses under his breath. Finally, the auctioneer raised the twig above his head, holding it delicately between his thumbs and forefingers. "Will anyone challenge the price of 2 platinum, 3 gold for this man?" he asked the crowd in practiced sing-song. "A worthy, well-mannered slave, no doubt useful both in the field and as breeding stock. Both he and his sons will work hard and require little food. No? I ask again, and again, and—" he snapped the twig. "The slave is sold, the bargain is made." He nodded down at Slovatsky. "Do you want to claim him now? Very well. No chains? 2 silvers for the ones he wears, if you want them. I'd advise it. This one hasn't quite been broken to his collar. Yet. And watch the teeth. He's nasty." Walter reached into his pouch and handed over the money, accepting the slave's leash and an iron key in return. A few cuffs and curses moved the man down the platform steps and over to the wagon. The slave's eyes widened as he saw Karl. "You're Karl." Slovatsky backhanded him across the face, then drew one of his knives. "Keep your tongue still if you want it to stay in your mouth." The point of his knife touching the smaller man's neck, he urged him onto the back of the wagon. The auctioneer smiled in encouragement before calling for the next slave to be sold.
"Just keep quiet," Karl whispered, "and relax. Everything's going to be fine."
"But—"
"Hush."
With a clatter, the wagon began to move.
"I know a smith on the edge of town. We have to make a stop first, but we'll have the collar off you in just a little while. Just be patient."
"You mean—" "He means you're free," Walter said, giving a flick to the reins. "It just won't show quite yet." The little man's mouth pursed, as though he were bracing himself for a slap. Then he shook his head, puzzled. "You mean that, Karl Cullinane?" It was half an unbelieved statement, half a terrified question. At Karl's nod, his face grew somber, and then his gap-toothed mouth broke into a smile, a special sort of smile. Karl didn't say anything. Nobody else would have understood how beautiful that smile was, unless they had seen it on the face of someone they loved, or in a mirror. "Cha'akresarkandin ipkatharden," the little man said, as he sat on a sack of wheat in the bed of the wagon, rubbing at the lesions left by his chains. The sores were infected, oozing a hideous green pus in several places. Undoubtedly his wrists and ankles ached dreadfully, but the light rubbing was all he allowed himself. "It's not so hard to pronounce. Not as difficult as Karl Cullinane."
"Call me Karl."
"You can call me Chak if you like. You can call me whatever you want." Chak nodded slowly. "I owe you, Karl. I don't understand why you freed me, but I owe you." Walter chuckled. "So your only objection to slavery is when you're the slave?" Chak's brow furrowed. "Of course, it's the way of things. Although—" he shook his head. "There's times when it turns my stomach." Then again, it doesn't take much to turn my stomach. I'm a cathard. We've got delicate digestion.
What happened to you? Karl asked. When we met, you were living off your winnings in the games, but...
You put an end to that, Karl Cullinane, and I've spent many an hour cursing your name. When you knocked me out of the first round, I was down to my last couple of coppers. Fool that I was, I signed with this shifty-eyed Thurangi. Said he was taking on guardsmen for Lord Karl. Damn elves can't help lying. In any case, 14 of us rode out of Pandathaway. Took a while until we were past Eric and clear of the trade routes. One night we camped and had dinner, with an extra ration of wine. Spiked wine. We all woke up in chains. Got sold off in small lots. Seems the Thurangi was a clandestine member of the Slavers Guild, not a recruiter for Karl. Jack shrugged. He was just trying to get us clear of Pandathaway. That way chaining us wouldn't bring the Guild's council down on him for ruining the damn city's reputation as a safe place to be. His eyes grew vague. Not that it'll stay safe for him. A clattering came from around the bend, accompanied by a distant snorting and whinnying of horses. Jack's nostrils flared. I know that bloody mare's whining. It's the wagon of my former owners. His right hand hovered around the left side of his waist. Wish I had a sword. He eyed the 2 scabbarded weapons lying on the bed of the wagon. Would you be willing to lend me one? Karl nodded. Sure. No. Walter shook his head. We don't want any trouble, Karl. Give him your tunic. I don't want them to see Jack out of his chains. We don't need loose talk about 2 strangers who bought and freed a slave. Karl shook his head. I never gave my word about not... Karl, it comes down to the same thing. Now, is your word good or not? Give him your tunic, please. Nodding slowly, Karl complied. Just sit tight for a moment. He tossed the tunic to Jack, who slipped it on without comment, although the hem fell well below his knees. Jack sat down, tucking a loose blanket around his legs to hide them, and began a careful study of the contents of a muslin sack. Karl snatched the rapier from the bed of the wagon and tossed it to Walter. Slavatsky raised an eyebrow. Karl shook his head. I'm not looking for trouble, Karl said. But slip this on anyway. We don't need to look helpless, do we? Well, Walter conceded the point, belting the rapier around his waist. Let's look busy. Karl jumped down from the wagon and busied himself with offering bowls of water to the mules, while Walter checked the leads of the trailing horses. The slaver's wagon passed without incident, although the 2 slavers riding beside it gave practiced glances at Karl and Walter's swords. Karl nodded grimly. When the smith had agreed to throw in a pair of swords, Karl had deliberately picked a slim rapier for Walter, one with a well-worn, sweat-browned bone hilt. Since Slavatsky wasn't good with a blade, it had seemed a sound precaution to pick a weapon that advertised a non-existent experience. Several grimy faces peered out through the barred windows of the boxy slave wagon. Jack kept his face turned away, although he couldn't resist sneaking a peek. As the wagon pulled away, he sighed. Damn. The word was the same in Arendra as in English, something Karl occasionally wondered about. Karl took his hand off the pommel of his sword. Walter and Ahira were right. They couldn't afford to draw attention to themselves here and now, but that doesn't excuse it. Walter peered into his face. I'm sorry, Karl. He spread his palms. Slavatsky's law number 9. Sometimes you can't do anything about something that sucks. He sighed. No matter how much it sucks, he murmured. Jack was already pulling off Karl's tunic. That child is what bothers me. Just too young. Karl raised an eyebrow as he slipped on the tunic. She's only 11 or so, but Ormist, he's the master. The rest are barely journeymen. Likes his women young. Says they're more fun. He's had this one for better than a year, ever since he raided Melloway. Kept chattering about keeping her, even after they got to Pandathaway. Said she wouldn't bring much coin compared with the pleasure. Karl's heart thudded. What? Walter's face whitened. He's raping an 11-year-old girl? Jack rubbed at the back of his neck. Every night. And she spends her days whimpering and begging for some healing draughts to stanch her bleeding. Ormist isn't gentle. Jack pounded his fist against the bed of the wagon. In the Cathart domains, we'd cut off his balls for that, and not worry about whether the girl was slave or free.
Walter, Karl said, we can't. Shut up, damn it. Give me a minute.
Slavatsky brought his fist to his mouth and chewed on his fingers for a long moment. Then he threw up his hands.
Cullinane, if it were possible that you set this up. Never mind.
He glared at Karl.
You remember what I was saying, about how you sometimes can't do anything about some things that suck?
Karl nodded slowly.
Well, you can just forget it. Sometimes I don't have the slightest idea what I'm talking about.
We agree on something, at least.
But for now, how do you want to handle this?
You're the tactician, not me.
I promised Ahira I wouldn't get in any fights, unless it was a matter of self-defense.
He chuckled, knowing what Walter was going to say.
And you also agreed that I'd decide what constitutes self-defense. This does.
Walter flashed a weak grin.
We'll work out an appropriate rationalization later. Tactics are your department. How are we going to do it?
Karl smiled.
We'll follow them, but lag behind, until it gets dark. Then you get the pleasure of skulking around, doing a nice, quiet recon.
He turned to the little man.
Do you want in on this? You can have a share of their coin.
Jack shrugged. I wouldn't mind. Always could use a bit of extra coin. Particularly, he said, patting at a phantom pouch, now. He took the other sword from the wagon and drew it partway out of the scabbard. It was a wide, single-edged blade, more of a falchion than anything else. Jack nodded. As long as my share includes this, it might be worth it.
Karl raised an eyebrow. And maybe you've a score to settle with these folks.
That too. Jack smiled grimly. There's always that. Karl sat back against the base of a towering pine, his sword balanced across his lap. Deliberately, he twisted the chain of the Metreyll Gusari between his fingers. It helped to keep his hands from shaking. Overhead, the branches and pine needles rustled in the wind, momentarily revealing, then hiding the flickering stars. A cool breeze blew from the west, sending a shiver across his chest. Half a mile down the road, almost hidden by a stand of trees, a campfire burned, sending gouts of sparkling ashes soaring into the night sky. Jack grunted. That friend of yours is taking too long, he whispered. Probably tripped over his feet. Got himself killed. He tested the edge of his falchion's blade, then sucked at the cut on his thumb for the 20th time. At least. Good blade. Karl shook his head.
No, we would have heard something.
We would have heard that it's a good blade? Truly?
No, if he'd gotten into trouble.
Karl stopped himself, then gave Jack a sideways look. The little man's face was a caricature of puzzlement.
Seems you're getting your sense of humor back.
Jack smiled. I always joke before a fight. Helps to steady the nerves. Now, my father, he always used to drink. Claimed it sharpened his eye, tightened his wrist. And it did, at that.
Oh?
Karl was skeptical. He let it show in his voice. A snort. Until the last time, of course. His wrist was so tight it was still straight as an arrow after a dwarf chopped his arm off. He bit his lip for a moment, which is why I don't drink before a fight. Joking keeps the arm looser. He looked over at Karl. Now that you know all about me, tell me where you're from. The name is unfamiliar, although you look a bit like a sulka. A tall sulka, but they do grow them high. Karl shook his head.
It's kind of complicated.
Perhaps I'll go into it sometime. As you wish. Jack took one end of the Metreyll Gusari. But you will tell me about this metal bola you're holding, please? Never seen one like that before. Doubt even you can throw it far.
You don't throw it, usually. And as to what it can do, I suspect I'll have a chance to show you in a while.
Damn sure of yourself, Karl.
Of course.
He smiled genially at Jack as he knitted his fingers together to keep them from shaking. In fact, it's all I can do to keep my sphincters under control. But he couldn't say that.
We were talking about that valley of yours.
Not mine. Not really. I just passed through it once. But it is pretty, and not occupied as far as I was able to tell. At least, not as of a few years ago. It's just too far away from any civilization. If anyone wanted to settle there, he'd have to travel for 10, 20 days to get to the nearest cleric. And since it's in the ranch, it'd be a bitch for humans to do business. Damn elves will take you, every time.
But people could live there.
I'm sure. The little man shrugged. Like I said, if they were willing to do without civilized necessities. I'm
making far too much noise,
a voice hissed, from somewhere in the darkness. Karl leaped to his feet, his sword in one hand, the Manriki Gosari in the other. Walter Slovatsky chuckled as he stepped from the shadows.
Relax. He's just your friendly neighborhood thief.
Karl quelled an urge to hit him. Damn it, he had asked Walter more than once not to sneak up on him. And Walter was usually good about it. Just nerves, I guess.
How are they set up?
Slovatsky squatted and picked up a twig.
This is the wagon, he said, making an X on the ground. The road runs here.
He drew a gentle arc to the left of the X.
Campfire here, on our side of the wagon. Throws light on our side of the road. Jack, there are 4 of them, no?
Yes.
Well, I could only see 3. One's on watch on top of the wagon, a bottle of wine and a cocked crossbow to keep him company. There's a huge one sleeping on our side of the fire. He's got a bow, which isn't cocked.
Slovatsky shrugged.
But he's sleeping with his sword in his hand. The 3rd one's in a hammock, strung up here, between 2 trees.
He spat on the ground.
Couldn't find the 4th. He could be out in the brush, relieving himself. But if he is, he's either got the runs or is constipated as hell. I gave him plenty of time to show up. No sign.
Maybe he's in the wagon.
Walter shrugged. Could be.
Jack shook his head. They don't sleep in the wagons. Too dangerous. And if one of them was with the women, you would have heard. They don't use gags. But I wouldn't worry about it. They've only got the 2 bows, and we've accounted for those. As soon as the fight starts, the 4th one will pop up, and we'll cut him down.
So, Walter asked, how do we do it?
Karl stood.
We'll play it as we did with Ullman and his friends, with a bit of the way we handled Dayton thrown in. Conceal yourself close to the wagon, close enough to be sure you can get the watchman with your knife, and wait. Chalk and I will work ourselves in as close as we can. Give us plenty of time to get into position, then start things off by throwing a knife, taking the watchman out. That'll be the signal for Chalk and me.
Fine, Walter said.
But we don't know what their watch schedule is. What if they switch off before we get there? Good point. If all they do is change places, don't worry about it. Just take out whichever one is on the wagon. On the other hand, if the crossbow moves from the wagon, or if the slaver by the fire cocks his bow, we'll need to know that before we take them. If that happens, just slip away. When enough time has passed and Jack and I haven't heard anything, we'll head back here, rethink the attack, and try again.
He turned to Chuck.
You kill the one in the hammock. I'll take the one by the fire.
The little man nodded. Should be easy. What do I do after?
Just grab one of their bows. See if you can find the 4th one. Or help me if I'm in trouble. Walter, when you take the watchman out, try for the chest. But any good disable is fine. Don't expose yourself to go in for the kill. As soon as you get the watchman, look for the 4th man.
He clapped a hand to Walter's shoulder.
Remember, football hero, you're free safety. We've got to be damn sure we get them all. If one of the bastards escapes, we're in deep trouble. We don't need for word to get back to Pandathaway that I'm still alive.
Walter's mouth quirked into a smile.
Bloodthirsty, aren't we? You got any goddamn objection? That wasn't an accusation. I did say we, after all.
Chapter 4. On the Eric Road. Those who know how to win are far more numerous than those who know how to make proper use of their victories. Polybius. Walter Slovatsky crouched in the tall grasses surrounding a huge oak, his belly hugging the ground, one of his 4 teak-handled throwing knives in his right hand. His palm concealed the blade. A reflection from the steel could alert his target 20 yards away. Beyond the boxy slave wagon with the sleepy-eyed guard sitting cross-legged on its flat roof, the campfire burned an orange rift into the night. From where he lay, Walter couldn't see beyond the wagon to where Karl and Jack were. Should be, he reminded himself. Should be. They were supposed to have moved silently into place by now. But Walter had long ago learned that things didn't go the way they should around Karl. Not that things always went badly, just differently. Too bloody much of the time. He slipped his thumb along the cool slickness of the blade and decided to wait just a few more minutes to make sure they had gotten to the right places. This had to work just right. If it didn't, the fact that Karl was still alive would soon be common knowledge, even if a surviving slaver caught only a glimpse of him. No other men 6.5 feet tall made a habit of taking on slavers on the trade routes of the Aran regions. Come to think of it, no shorter men got into that habit. The Pandathaway guilds had long made that an ill-advised profession to get into. So why the hell am I in this? Not because of some 11-year-old girl I've never even laid eyes on. It was because of goddamn Karl Cullinane. As usual. Walter could have tolerated knowing that somewhere, some little girl was being mistreated, even raped. People were being mistreated everywhere. Cutting the number by 1 or 2 wasn't going to change that. You had to take the long view. Maybe there was a way to change things, but it couldn't happen overnight. Risking everything for a moment's gratification just didn't make any sense at all. So why did I agree to this? He sighed. Goddamn Karl Cullinane. If I had just shrugged and dismissed it, he'd have looked at me as if I were a piece of shit. And was that such a big deal? Was Karl Cullinane's opinion so important? Yes. Ahira was Walter's best friend, and Karl had worked out a way to bring Ahira out of the grave. That counted for something. That counted for a lot. And Karl's growth over the past months counted for more. When they had arrived on this side, Karl had been a directionless flake. Walter had watched him grow, seen him strip away his shield of not caring, of choosing not to understand others, not to commit himself. It all added up to respect. The simple fact was that Walter respected Karl, and wanted to receive the same in turn from him. Walter Slavatsky had always been respected by everyone whose opinion he cared about, and he wasn't about to learn how to live without that. He shook himself. If I don't pay attention to what's going on, I may have to learn how to live with a bunch of crossbow bolts in me. He rubbed at a slim scar that curved around the left side of his collarbone. A knife had left that as a remembrance of Lundale. It hadn't been any fun at all. One of his own knives, and it had cost quite a bit to get it replaced in Pandathaway. In fact, enough. It was time to stop stalling and get it done, one way or the other. He set the knife down with the bulk of the oak's trunk between it and the view of the watchman, and raised himself on his toes and fingertips, inching slowly, silently into the cover of the tree. Aim for the chest, Karl had said. Very well. The chest it would be. Picking up the knife between the thumb and first 2 fingers of his right hand, he stood and moved quickly to his right. Raising the knife to shoulder level, he threw, then dove for the cover of the grasses. With a flicker of steel, the knife tumbled end over end through the night air. The guard must have seen the sudden movement. With a grunt, he jerked back into the side. The knife's hilt caught him a glancing blow in the left arm, then fell away in the dark. "Datharty!" the guard called out as he reached for his crossbow and jumped to his feet. "Raiders!" Oh shit. Karl had said to hide in the shadows, but he hadn't been counting on this. With a functioning crossbowman on the roof of the wagon, the fight would be over before it began. The bowman, a blocky little man, leveled his crossbow at Walter. Ignoring the rustle of branches overhead, Walter broke into a staggered sprint, snatching another of his knives from his belt and throwing it, still on the run. At least it might distract the bowman for a second or 2. With a meaty thunk, the knife sank into the watchman's thigh. His leg crumpled. He fell to the roof, a sound halfway between a scream and a groan issuing from his lips. Clapping his hands to his leg, he dropped the crossbow. Walter reached the side of the wagon. Without a pause, he grasped the edge of its roof and pulled himself up. Below, steel clashed against steel. Karl fought with the gigantic swordsman who had been sleeping next to the campfire. Swords flashed in the firelight. Screams and shouts filled the air. Groaning, the watchman pulled the knife from his thigh, rose to his knees, and lunged at Walter, stabbing downward. Walter caught the descending arm with both hands, stopping the razor-sharp point just inches from his left eye. A clout to the side of his head sent the world spinning, but he held on as they rolled around the rough wood. The watchman's free hand clawed at Walter's throat. The rough fingers fastened on his windpipe. Walter tried to drag air into his lungs as they struggled face to face, gasping as he drew in the foul reek of wine on the other's breath. Inexorably, the knife moved toward his face, the point seeking his left eye as if of its own volition. Walter pushed against the knife arm. The blade's progress slowed. The point stopped 4 inches from his eye. His hands started to tremble. The point moved closer, 3 inches away, then 2. Then, with a heave, Walter lurched on top of the slaver, driving his knee into the open wound on the other's thigh. The watchman screamed. His fingers loosened from Walter's throat. Just for a moment, the watchman's right arm lost its strength. Walter didn't wait for him to recover. He twisted the knife arm behind the watchman's back and up, past the hammerlock position, until he felt a sickening wet pop as the arm separated from the shoulder socket, the knife falling from the slaver's limp fingers. The slaver whimpered, feebly. He kicked at Walter, trying to slide away on his belly. With one smooth motion, Walter snatched up the knife and stabbed downward into the other's kidney. He pulled the knife out and stabbed again, and again and again, as the blood poured from the slaver's wounds. With a muffled scream, the slaver twitched, then fell still. Walter's stomach rebelled. He fell to his hands and knees, sour vomit spewing from his mouth. Wiping his mouth with a bloody hand, he willed his body back under control. Below, Cullinane sliced down at his huge opponent's sword arm. As the other parried, Karl whipped the Metreyll Gusari around the slaver's blade and jerked, sending both the Metreyll Gusari and his enemy's sword flipping end over end into the night. He lunged in full extension. His blade slid into the slaver's throat, almost to the hilt. Blood fountained as Karl kicked the slaver off his blade. The giant gave a bubbling groan and fell face down onto the campfire. As he lay there motionless, the fire hissed, sending up clouds of smoke and steam. A reek of scorched flesh reached Walter's nostrils. He gagged, but quelled the urge to vomit again. "Walter!" Karl shouted. "Are you okay?" Walter nodded. Chak walked slowly into the dwindling firelight, his falchion dripping with blood. "Mine's taken care of, but where's Ormist?" Walter vaulted to the ground, letting his knees give to absorb the shock. "We've got to find him, quickly. If he gets away—" "I know, damn it, I know." Karl looked from side to side, his face a snarling rictus. "Chak, you go that way. I'll—" He stopped, lowering the point of his sword. Cullinane smiled. He scanned the ground for a moment, then walked over to the fire and picked up a water bucket and a soft cloth. Ignoring the body that lay smoldering in the ashes, he dipped the cloth in the water and started washing his hands. "There's another cloth here. Clean yourself up. You can use it." What was this nonsense? This wasn't any time to relax. "Karl!" "I wouldn't worry about the fourth man," Karl said, cleaning, then resheathing his sword. "Wouldn't worry about him at all." A distant flapping of leathery wings sounded from the direction of the road. "Although," Cullinane went on, "next time I wish you'd look a bit more closely. Ormus was sleeping in a hammock slung up way high in that oak tree." He pointed at the tree Walter had hidden under. When the alarm sounded, he lit out. A dark, massive bulk came into view overhead. The wind whipped up dust and burning embers from the campfire. Chak shouted and dove for the concealment of the woods. "Relax, Walter." Elegon hovered overhead. "I don't think Ormist will be talking to anyone. And would you tell your friend that I'm harmless, please?" He landed on the ground with a thump, then lowered his massive head so that Karl could reach up and pat it. Karl's laugh sounded forced as he scratched vigorously against the dragon's jaw. "Only relatively." "True. What are you doing around here anyway?" "I told you I'd do better this time. And Ahira figured you might get into trouble. He sent me out to check the road from the sanctuary to Metreyll. When I didn't spot you, I started checking this road." Walter nodded, then knelt over the water bucket, looking away from the body sprawled over the coals. He splashed water on his face. The sudden cold helped quell the last traces of his nausea. "That was nice timing, Elegon," he said. A clattering from inside the wagon jerked his head around. "Karl, what say we free some people?" Karl shot a glance toward the woods. "Chak, it's safe. You can come out now. No answer.
Don't worry. He'll come out when he calms down.
Then, accusingly,
You didn't tell him about me, did you?
Well, no. It didn't exactly come up. I wasn't thinking ahead.
Not thinking ahead.
That was Karl all over. In fact,
Oh my God.
Karl, we're going to free these people, no? Cullinane cocked his head, puzzled.
Of course. That's the purpose of the exercise, after all.
What? Bear with me a minute. A cold wind sent a shiver up his spine. There's 15, 16 slaves in the wagon, right?
Not slaves anymore.
Cullinane stooped to pick up his Manrikigasari, then twirled it easily.
Not anymore.
And I assume some of them will want to join up with us, at least for a while. Cullinane nodded as he pulled the smoldering body of the dead slaver from the campfire. He dragged him a few feet onto the bare dirt before riffling through his pouch.
Gin,
he said, dangling a brass keyring.
And you're right. But so what? We've got enough food.
And some might not want to come with us. They might want to go home.
So what?
So, Walter said, impatient, we give them some coin, maybe a horse if we can spare one, and wave as they go on their merry way, right?
Right.
He lifted his head and raised his voice.
Stand easy in there, he said in Narendra. You will be free in a moment.
Damn it, Karl, listen to me. What happens when they start talking about the nice big man who, teamed with a dragon of all things, took on a bunch of Pandathaway slavers and then freed them? Word gets back to Pandathaway, somebody puts two and two together, and... Cullinane's face went ashen.
And the hunters are on our tails again.
Including Andy Andy's rather pretty one, which isn't going to be all that mobile in a few months. I care about her too, Karl. Exactly what we've been trying to avoid. So what do we do? Karl Cullinane drew himself up straight.
We free them. Period.
Walter shrugged. Fine. And what do we do about the aftermath?
Karl, if you aren't scared shitless, you don't understand the situation. We work it out, somehow. Just like we work out what to do with that Metreyll armsman.
He started toward the wagon, then caught himself.
Of course.
As he turned back to face Walter, his face was creased in a huge smile.
Did you ever study economics?
No. What the hell did that have to do with anything?
I did. For a while, at least.
A mischievous grin replaced the friendly smile.
And economics is, my dear friend, the answer.
Well?
I'll tell you later. Come on. We've got some locks to unlock, some chains to break. I think I'm going to enjoy this. You coming?
Sure. Why not? Besides freeing them, the only choice was to leave them as slaves, and Cullinane wouldn't accept that.
Probably have to cut their tongues out as well, and I wouldn't stand for that. So I might as well get what pleasure I can out of this. Sure as anything, I'm going to be in front of the blades when the shit hits the fan.
As they walked toward the wagon, Karl threw an arm around Walter's shoulder.
You know, there are times when I enjoy this profession. A lot.
A half shudder went through Cullinane's body, but his smile remained intact. Understandable. It was one thing for Karl to feign shrugging off his revulsion for violence, but another matter to truly take bloodletting for granted. The day you can kill without any twinge of conscience, Karl, is the day I want to get as far away from you as I can.
You've really got a solution? The solution, Walter.
Cullinane smiled.
By the way, in case I didn't mention it, you did just fine. If the watchman had been able to use his bow, all three of us would have been in deep trouble. The rest of it doesn't matter.
With a sniff, he dismissed Walter's vomiting as irrelevant.
Thanks.
Respect. That felt good.
Next question. Is Cullinane's respect worth going through this again? Next answer. I'll duck that issue for as long as I can.
But this idea of yours, you're not going to tell me yet, are you?
Nope. A little frustration is good for the soul.
I'm not going to like the answer, am I?
No.
Elegon snorted.
Not one little bit.
And that brings us to the end of Chapter 4. This was an enjoyable installment, somewhat gruesome images of the realities of slavery aside. We got to see another fight scene, which I have always thought Rosenberg writes excellently, and we got reintroduced to Chuck, who we last saw in the fighting pits in the previous book. In the next installment, we, and Walter, will find out exactly what Karl is planning to deal with the problem of notoriety. If you enjoyed this reading, please consider liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel. It helps convince the algorithm to show these recordings to more people. Thank you once again for listening. Have a good night.